Julian Westbrook stood at the floor-to-ceiling window of his penthouse, watching the city lights flicker like distant stars. The view cost him $12 million, but tonight it felt worthless. His reflection stared back at him, a man who had everything money could buy, yet owned nothing that truly mattered. At 34, he had built an empire from his father's legacy, turning Westbrook Technologies into one of the most successful companies in the country. His face had graced magazine covers, his name opened every door in the city, and his bank account had more zeros than most people could count. But his heart remained locked, guarded by walls built from years of disappointment and betrayal. The pattern of rejection. The women came and went like seasons. They arrived with bright smiles and designer dresses, speaking words that sounded like affection, but tasted like ambition. Victoria Lang had been the most recent, a socialite who planned their wedding before their third date, already measuring his penthouse for redecorating. She talked about love while scrolling through jewelry catalogs. When Julian finally ended things, she didn't cry over losing him. She cried over losing access to his credit cards. Before Victoria, there was Amanda, who sold their private conversations to tabloids. Before Amanda, there was Christine, who tried to forge his signature on property documents. The list went on, each name a reminder that his wealth was a magnet for the wrong kind of attention. The decision to stay alone. Julian made peace with loneliness. He threw himself into work, spending 18-hour days at the office, making decisions that affected thousands of employees. His board members respected him. His competitors feared him. His few real friends worried about him. Grace, his elderly housekeeper who had worked for his father, often found him asleep at his desk, still wearing yesterday's suit. She would cover him with a blanket and leave hot coffee on his desk, never saying what they both knew. He was running from something that couldn't be outrun. The emptiness inside him grew larger with each passing year, a void that no amount of success could fill. The unexpected evening. The charity gala wasn't Julian's idea. His company was sponsoring the event for the city's arts programs, and attendance was mandatory for appearances. He arrived late, wearing a custom suit that cost more than most cars, his face arranged in the practiced smile of someone who had mastered the art of looking engaged while feeling nothing. The ballroom glittered with crystal chandeliers and silk dresses. Conversations hummed around him, the usual mixture of gossip, business deals, and social climbing. Julian moved through the crowd like a ghost, shaking hands and making small talk that meant nothing. Then the music started. The pianist who didn't notice him, the grand piano sat on a raised platform at the center of the ballroom. A young woman sat before it, her fingers poised above the keys. She wore a simple black dress, no jewelry, no elaborate styling. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical bun, and her face held a concentration that shut out the entire room. When she began to play, the ballroom fell silent. The music flowed from her fingers like water, each note crystal clear and achingly beautiful. Julian found himself moving closer, drawn by something he couldn't name. He watched her face as she played, seeing emotions cross her features that she probably didn't know she was showing. Joy, sorrow, longing, peace. The music wasn't just sound. It was feeling made audible. She played for 20 minutes, 3 pieces that ranged from gentle to powerful. And when she finished, the applause was thunderous. The first meeting, Julian waited as the crowd dispersed, watching as the pianist gathered her sheet music with quick, efficient movements. She seemed eager to leave, uncomfortable with the attention. He approached her as she was closing her folder, and when she looked up, her eyes held no recognition. No spark of interest at seeing one of the wealthiest men in the city. Just polite curiosity. That alone was remarkable. Julian extended his hand, suddenly nervous in a way he hadn't felt in years. He introduced himself, and she shook his hand with a firm, brief grip. Her name was Nina Castellano. She taught piano at a small conservatory across town. No, she didn't follow tech news. No, she hadn't heard of Westbrook Technologies. Yes, she enjoyed the gala, but she really needed to go. Her students had early lessons tomorrow. The unexpected. Honesty Julian, usually so smooth in social situations, found himself stumbling over words. He asked if she performed often. Nina smiled, a small, genuine expression that transformed her serious face. She explained that she rarely played in public anymore. Teaching was her passion now, working with children who couldn't afford private lessons. The conservatory barely paid her rent, but the work fulfilled something in her that concert halls never had. Julian mentioned he would like to hear her play again. Nina looked at him with those clear, assessing eyes and said something no one had ever said to him before. She told him he seemed lonely and that perhaps music might help with that. Then she gathered her things and left, leaving Julian standing alone in the emptying ballroom, feeling seen in a way that was both uncomfortable and oddly comforting. The beginning of something new that night. Back in his empty penthouse, Julian couldn't stop thinking about the pianist who didn't care about his money. Nina Castellano had looked at him and seen a lonely person, not a bank account. She had offered him music, not her number. She had walked away without a single question about his wealth, his company, or his availability. For the first time in years, Julian felt something shift inside him. The walls around his heart, built so carefully over so many disappointments, developed a small crack. He sat at his window, watching the city lights, and for once the view didn't feel quite so empty. Somewhere out there, a woman who played music like she was speaking directly to the soul was probably asleep, dreaming about tomorrow's piano lessons, completely unaware that she had just changed everything for a man who thought he was beyond changing. Julian told himself it was just curiosity. He had Grace research the conservatory where Nina taught, learning that she gave public recitals every Thursday evening for students and their families. The admission was free, just a donation box by the door. The following Thursday, Julian found himself driving across town to a neighborhood he had never visited before. The conservatory was housed in an old building with peeling paint and cracked steps. Inside, the floors creaked and the walls held faded posters of long-ago concerts. It was nothing like the grand concert halls Julian occasionally visited for business events. Yet when he entered the small performance room with its mismatched chairs and out-of-tune heating system, he felt something he hadn't experienced in those expensive venues. He felt welcome. The performance that spoke Nina sat at an upright piano that had seen better decades. Around her, families filled the modest space with children fidgeting and parents smiling tiredly after long work days. She began to play, and once again Julian was transported. But this time, he noticed something different. Nina played with even more emotion here than she had at the gala. Her whole body moved with the music, her face alive with expression. Between pieces, she spoke to the audience about the composers, telling stories that made classical music feel accessible and exciting. She praised her students by name, celebrating their progress with genuine pride. After the recital, children rushed to her with drawings and questions. She knelt to their level, giving each one her full attention. Julian watched from the back row, seeing a side of her that the gala had only hinted at. This woman wasn't performing for applause or recognition. She was sharing something she loved with people who might never afford a concert ticket otherwise. The discovery Julian returned the next Thursday, and the one after that, he always sat in the back, always left quietly before the crowd dispersed. He told himself he was just enjoying the music, but he knew the truth. He was drawn to Nina in a way that terrified and excited him. On his fourth visit, everything changed. Julian arrived early and took his usual seat in the back corner. But before the recital began, Nina walked directly toward him. His heart hammered as she stopped in front of his row, her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. She asked if he was going to keep hiding in the back or if he planned to introduce himself properly. Julian felt heat rise to his face, caught like a schoolboy. Nina's lips curved into a slight smile. She told him the conservatory welcomed all visitors, but she preferred honest ones. Then she walked back to the piano, leaving Julian both embarrassed and oddly pleased that she had noticed him. Coffee and conversation. After that evening's performance, Nina approached Julian as people were leaving. She suggested they talk, and he found himself following her to a small cafe 2 blocks away. The place was nothing special, with worn countertops and coffee that came in chipped mugs. They sat across from each other in a corner booth, and Nina asked the question directly. She wanted to know why a man like him kept coming to a rundown conservatory in a neighborhood far from his usual world. Julian hesitated, then chose honesty. He told her the truth. Her music reached something in him that had been silent for too long. Nina studied him with those clear eyes, and he felt exposed in a way that should have been uncomfortable, but somehow wasn't. Learning each other's stories, they talked for 3 hours that first night. Nina shared her story, speaking about growing up in a family where money was always tight. Her father had died when she was 12, leaving her mother to raise 3 children alone. Music had been her escape, her refuge, her way of making sense of the world. A scholarship had taken her through music school, and she had briefly pursued a concert career. But performing on grand stages felt hollow compared to seeing a child's face light up when they mastered their first song. Julian listened, genuinely listened, in a way he rarely did with anyone. When Nina asked about his life, he found himself telling her things he had never shared with the women he had dated. He spoke about the pressure of inheriting his father's company at 25, about the loneliness of never knowing if people wanted him or his money, about the failed relationships that had left him cynical and guarded, the financial burden. Over the following weeks, their Thursday coffee meetings became routine. Julian learned that Nina was barely surviving financially. The conservatory paid her a small salary, and she supplemented it by giving private lessons in her tiny apartment. She walked to work to save bus fare. She bought day-old bread from the bakery at a discount. Her piano at home was borrowed from the conservatory because she couldn't afford her own. Yet she never complained, never asked Julian for anything. She spoke passionately about her students, about a talented 10-year-old named Lily who had perfect pitch, but whose family couldn't afford to continue lessons. About Marco, a teenager from a rough neighborhood who found peace in Mozart. Nina's dream was to expand the scholarship program to reach more children who needed music in their lives. Julian found himself wanting to write a check for everything she needed, but he held back. He was learning that Nina would see that as solving problems with money, and she had already made it clear she valued things that couldn't be bought. The growing connection Julian started finding excuses to visit the conservatory on other days besides Thursday. He would arrive with coffee for Nina during her break between lessons. They would sit in the small teacher's lounge, talking about everything from music theory to childhood memories to their different views of the world. Nina challenged him in ways no one else did. She questioned his assumptions about success and happiness. She made him think about what truly mattered. And slowly, carefully, Julian felt his walls crumbling. He caught himself smiling at random moments during board meetings, remembering something Nina had said. He turned down social invitations that once felt obligatory, choosing instead to spend evenings at the conservatory, sometimes just sitting in an empty practice room listening to Nina teach. The moment of realization. It happened on a rainy Tuesday evening. Julian had stayed late at the conservatory, helping Nina move an old bookshelf in the storage room. They were both dusty and laughing about something silly when their eyes met. In that moment, with rain drumming against the windows and Nina's hair escaping its bun in wild curls, Julian knew with absolute certainty that he was in love, not the shallow attraction he had felt before. Not infatuation or desire mixed with loneliness, real love, the kind that made him want to know every detail of her day, the kind that made her happiness more important than his own, the kind that terrified him because he had so much to lose. Nina must have seen something in his expression because her smile faded, replaced by something softer, more uncertain. The air between them felt charged, full of unspoken words. Julian took a step back, suddenly afraid of moving too fast, of ruining something precious. He made an excuse about needing to leave, and Nina let him go, but her eyes followed him with a question she didn't ask. That night, alone in his penthouse, Julian faced the truth. He was completely, irrevocably in love with a woman who might not feel the same way, a woman who valued authenticity over everything he had spent his life building. And for the first time since his father's death, Julian Westbrook was genuinely, deeply afraid of losing something that mattered more than any business deal or financial success ever could. Julian's carefully constructed new world shattered on a Friday afternoon. He was in his office reviewing quarterly reports when his assistant buzzed him. Victoria Lang was in the lobby, refusing to leave without seeing him. Julian felt his stomach tighten. He had ended things with Victoria 8 months ago, long before he met Nina. He told his assistant to send her away, but Victoria had never been one to accept no for an answer. Within minutes, she swept into his office wearing a designer dress and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. She spoke as if no time had passed, as if their relationship had been merely paused rather than ended. Victoria had been in Europe, she explained, doing charity work with her family. She had time to think, to realize what she had lost. She wanted another chance. The manipulation, Julian remained firm, telling Victoria there was nothing to discuss. But she was persistent, laying out her case like a business proposal. She had changed, she claimed. She understood now what really mattered. Her family's connections could help expand Westbrook Technologies into European markets. They made sense together, came from the same world, understood the same pressures. Victoria reached across his desk, placing her manicured hand over his. She mentioned she had already spoken to his mother, who was thrilled at the possibility of reconciliation. Julian pulled his hand away, anger rising in his chest. He told Victoria clearly that he had moved on, that his life had taken a different direction. Victoria's smile turned cold. She asked if he had met someone, and Julian's hesitation told her everything. Victoria laughed, a brittle sound that held no humor. She wondered aloud what kind of woman had captured his attention. Hoping for his sake, she understood the responsibilities that came with his position. The terrible timing that evening. Julian had plans to attend Nina's special year-end recital at the conservatory. It was her most important performance of the year, where her advanced students would showcase their progress. Julian had been looking forward to it all week, but Victoria refused to leave his office, extending their conversation with manufactured emergencies and emotional appeals. By the time Julian finally managed to extract himself, promising his security would escort her out, he was running late. He arrived at the conservatory 40 minutes after the recital had started, slipping into the back row as quietly as possible. Nina was at the piano, accompanying one of her students. Even from the back, Julian could see the concentration on her face, the pride in her posture. His heart swelled watching her. This was where she belonged, surrounded by music and students she had nurtured. This was real. This mattered. The confrontation. The recital ended with thunderous applause. Julian waited as families congratulated their children, as Nina hugged each student with genuine affection. He was moving toward her when Victoria appeared in the doorway of the conservatory. She must have followed him. Victoria scanned the room with barely concealed disdain, her expensive clothes and jewelry making her look like she had wandered into the wrong building. Her eyes found Julian and then followed his gaze to Nina. Understanding dawned on Victoria's face, followed by something cruel. She walked directly to Julian, looping her arm through his with possessive familiarity. She spoke loudly enough for nearby people to hear, thanking him for inviting her to see where he spent his charity time. Nina had been approaching them, but stopped mid-step. Julian saw her face change, saw something close off behind her eyes. He tried to pull away from Victoria, but she held tight, continuing her performance. The painful misunderstanding. Nina excused herself, turning away to speak with a parent. Julian finally wrenched free from Victoria, his voice low and furious. He demanded to know what she thought she was doing. Victoria smiled, satisfied with the damage she had caused. She told him she was helping him see reality. Did he really think he could build a life with a struggling piano teacher? His board would laugh at him. His social circle would mock him. Nina deserved someone from her own world, and Julian deserved someone who could stand beside him at galas and business dinners without embarrassment. Julian's hands clenched into fists. He told Victoria to leave and never contact him again, but the damage was done. When Nina finally finished her conversations and looked around, Julian saw her slipping out the side door. He chased after her, catching her on the sidewalk outside. The heart-to-heart Nina stood under a streetlight, her arms wrapped around herself against the cold. Julian approached slowly, afraid she would run. He tried to explain about Victoria, about the unwanted visit, about the manipulation. Nina listened quietly, her face unreadable. When he finished, she spoke with a calmness that broke his heart. She told him she had been thinking lately about their differences, about the gap between their worlds. Tonight had shown her what she already suspected. She didn't belong in his life. She couldn't attend fancy charity events or make small talk with billionaires. She was a piano teacher who walked to work and bought discount bread. Julian started to protest, but Nina held up her hand. She admitted something that made her voice tremble. She had fallen in love with him deeply and completely. That was exactly why she needed to step back. Because loving him meant watching him struggle between two worlds. Because eventually he would resent having to choose. Because she couldn't be what his life required. The choice. Julian felt something crack wide open in his chest. For his entire adult life, he had let fear dictate his choices. Fear of being used had kept him isolated. Fear of vulnerability had kept him guarded. Fear of judgment had kept him in a world that left him empty. But standing there, watching the woman he loved prepare to walk away, Julian realized he was done being afraid. He took Nina's hands, holding them firmly when she tried to pull away. He told her everything, the words spilling out with raw honesty. He spoke about how empty his life had been before her, how her music had awakened something in him he thought was dead, how watching her teach had shown him what real success looked like, how her integrity and passion made every woman from his past seem like a pale imitation of what love should be. Julian's voice broke as he told her the truth. He didn't need her to fit into his world. He wanted to build a new world with her, one where music mattered more than money, where teaching children was as important as board meetings, where love was measured in moments rather than possessions. The grand gesture, Nina's eyes filled with tears, but she still looked uncertain. Julian understood. Words were easy. Proof was harder. He asked her to give him 1 week to show her he meant what he said. Nina hesitated, then nodded. Julian spent the next 7 days transforming his life. He established a foundation, transferring a significant portion of his personal wealth to create permanent scholarships for underprivileged music students. He hired Nina as the director, giving her full control and a salary that would let her focus on expanding the program. He reduced his hours at Westbrook Technologies, promoting capable people on his team to take on responsibilities he had unnecessarily hoarded. He sold his penthouse, the one with the $12 million view that had always felt empty, and bought a brownstone near the conservatory. On the 7th day, Julian returned to the conservatory with something he had been working on in secret. He had learned to play piano, just one piece, practicing obsessively every spare moment. It was rough, full of mistakes, nothing like Nina's effortless grace. But he played it for her in the empty recital hall, his fingers stumbling through a simple melody. When he finished, Nina was crying. She told him it was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever done for her. The new beginning. Nina crossed the space between them, and finally, Julian kissed her. It was gentle and sweet, full of promise and hope. When they pulled apart, Nina laughed through her tears. She told Julian he really did need more piano lessons. He agreed, asking if she knew a good teacher. 6 months later, they were married in the conservatory's recital hall, surrounded by students and families, by Grace, who cried happy tears, and by Ben, who grudgingly admitted Julian might be good enough for his sister. Julian wore a simple suit, and Nina wore her mother's wedding dress. There was no elaborate catering, just potluck dishes brought by families from the neighborhood. The music was provided by Nina's students, each playing a piece they had worked hard to master. It was imperfect and beautiful and real. Julian stood at the front of that humble room, watching Nina walk toward him with a smile that outshone every diamond he had ever seen, and knew with absolute certainty that he had finally found what he had been searching for his entire life. Not wealth or status or empty admiration, but love. Simple, honest, transformative love. And as they exchanged vows in that room filled with music and genuine affection, Julian Westbrook understood the truth his father had tried to teach him years ago. The best things in life cannot be bought. They can only be earned, nurtured, and treasured. And the quiet musician who had once seemed so far from his world had given him something priceless. She had given him a home. Not a building or an address, but a place in her heart where he finally, truly belonged. The end.